So hi everyone, my name is Nico Quintana. I'm the programs coordinator with Seattle Pride. But tonight I'm representing the Seattle Out and Proud Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that's directly related to Seattle Pride. The Seattle Out and Proud Foundation focuses on art and education programming for the LGBTQIA+ community. So we host things like this panel. Tonight we're going to be covering the topic of policy and advocacy, looking out in 2023, 2024. I'm really excited for the panel that we put together. We have a bunch of experts here to talk to you all this evening. Our foundation relies on the support and donation of our community and also businesses. Speaking of businesses, this beautiful venue that we're in, the amenities we've enjoyed, like the wine and the food, all of that was actually donated by Chateau Ste. Michelle. Their employee resource group. Yeah, let's give them a shout. So their employee resource group, Blended Pride, was actually presenting partner for us during Seattle Pride this last summer. They're supporting us again this evening, and we're very grateful for that. So we're going to start the panel in just a moment. If you haven't already, take a second to silence your cell phones. Friendly reminder. And then around 8 p.m., we'll move on to audience Q&A. So I'll be coming around with a mic. You can ask a question, a follow-up question, or just something that you're curious about. Without further wait, let me introduce our moderator for this evening, Jupiter Peraza. I don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to read it. If I could, I would literally have her resume printed for each one of you. It is that good. So Jupiter comes to us as the former director of social justice and empowerment initiatives at the Transgender District in San Francisco. She wrote and led efforts to pass legislation that commemorated transgender history in San Francisco, most notably the nation's first Transgender History Month, and she initiated the landmark designation of the Turk and Taylor Streets intersection in San Francisco's Tenderloin, where the Compton's cafeteria riots of 1966 occurred. Earlier this year, she graduated from the Women's Foundation of California, Dr. Maria Solis Policy Institute Fellowship. She was also recognized as Senate District 11's Woman of the Year. Ms. Peraza's advocacy truly highlights her intersectionality as a documented trans Latina, and we're so lucky to have her with us this evening to steward this conversation, to bring her expertise to the table. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was a very wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. Good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here. Once again, thank you to Seattle Pride, and thank you to Seattle Out and Proud Foundation, and of course, to Chateau Ste. Michelle for this lovely venue. I am still flabbergasted. It is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, so very happy to be here. As Nick mentioned, my name is Jupiter Peraza. My pronouns are she, her. I am a trans and immigrant rights activist based in San Francisco. And I am very lucky and excited to be here with you all alongside this incredible lineup of panelists as well. And tonight we'll be discussing a broad range of issues and topics. Nonetheless, we would do our very best to consolidate our discussion into the 1 hour and a half that we have together. Nonetheless, it'll be very exciting and fun. But without further ado, I would love for the panelists to introduce themselves. Please share some of your identities that you hold, and what brought you to this panel. And Nico, we can start with you.
Great. So, okay. Hi, my name is Nico Quintana, and it's really great to be here. I'm glad I found my way here. I got lost driving around, and I went in the exit the wrong way, but that's okay. Anyway, I'm here now, and so I'm Nico. I go by he, him, or they, them pronouns. I'm Indigenous, Latinx, trans, masculine, identified person. I am a lawyer. I don't know how that happened really. Actually, it's very difficult. I wouldn't do it again. But anyway, I'm glad where I am now. I am a lead attorney for a Latin Rights Project. I help run a few different programs, legal programs aimed at providing legal services and support to BIPOC trans communities in Washington, particularly focusing on supporting Black trans femmes in Washington State. Before I had done my current job, I was a public defender for 4 years in King County, and before that, I did a lot of policy work across and organizing work across the U.S. I came out as trans in 1997. I don't know how old I look at these days, but I won't tell you, but you can probably guess how old I am a little bit. But I came out BE before Ellen, and a lot of things. I ran away from my own quinceañera. Anyway, if you don't know what that is, it's a Mexican tradition, very important, just not for me. So I've had a long road with trans movements and just seeing the arc of history of what's been going on with justice movements in general, and I'm just really happy to be here.
My name is Mattie. You'll have to forgive me. I drink a Trenta fruity drink at Starbucks. And I'm particularly sensitive to caffeine. I didn't know that there was caffeine in it. So I'm like vibrating at a little higher frequency this evening. I feel like I'm possessed and just crawling out of my skin. But my name is Mattie. My pronouns are they, them. Currently, I work as a senior program coordinator of transgender health at Swedish, which is a long time coming. A lot of trash situations happened at Swedish and continue to happen at Swedish, but we have a really amazing team of mostly queer and trans folks of color, including our amazing medical director, Dr. Kevin Wang. And we're just kind of squeaky wheels, we're troublemakers, we're in arguments with people all the time, which I think is really what you need in healthcare to get anything done. I am also co-founder of Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network. We are a collective of 5, again, mostly trans folks of color. We started in 2018 with about $1,800, and since then have been able to give over $1 million to trans women of color, in particular in Washington State and a few other states around the U.S. as well. Also co-founder of Tiki Black Pride, which is a BIPOC-centered trans pride event. And we just had our 3rd year this last summer. What else do I do? I'm a parent to an amazing trans child, which has, surprisingly enough, as a trans person myself, taught me a lot. What else? I feel like it's so weird to talk about yourself sometimes and talk about the things that you do. I was also part of the work group that created the Gender Affirming Treatment Act, which just got passed into law, not this year, but last year in January. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Hey everyone, that's I'm Li Nowlin-Sohl. I use she, her pronouns. I am a biracial white and Chinese gender non-conforming woman. I, like Nico, am also an attorney. I'd probably do it again, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. So I'm an attorney with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, their LGBTQ project. So I work on litigation on LGBTQ issues across the country. Prior to that, I was with the ACLU of Washington working on a variety of issues, but also LGBTQ ones, including suing Swedish before Mattie got there. So thank you for my job. So my experience is kind of more on the litigation side, and locally I've been involved with the Q Law Foundation for about 6 years now, which is an LGBTQ nonprofit here that's focused on providing kind of legal access to the LGBTQ community. We have a free legal clinic, we also have a trans legal clinic, and helping kind of just educate the legal community, so attorneys and judges on LGBTQ issues. So yeah, that's me.
Beautiful, beautiful. I told you that we have such an incredible lineup of panelists, which is incredible, as you all heard. And from what we all shared, we can definitely infer that we all come from different backgrounds and we all hold different experiences. Some similar, others different. We have 2 attorneys, also parents as well. I wanted a quinceañera, I didn't get one, but you know. But soon, we shall see. But an aspect that I believe that it's very important to note that I'm confident that can propel us forward and towards a more holistic aspect of liberation is acknowledging that the trans community is not monolithic, right? We draw from an extensive pool of knowledge, resources, backgrounds. So I ask you all, could you share how your intersectionality has informed the work that you all do on a daily basis and how you pull from that? And Li, we can begin with you.
Ooh, that's a big question. So I kind of told you a little bit about myself, and I think being queer and being biracial kind of means that you don't really fit in anywhere. And so for me, like, my intersectionality is a little bit complicated in that sense of not, like, some of the communities that I belong to, I don't fully belong to. So I think belonging is a big theme for me on my intersectionality, right? Is like this feeling of not belonging in white spaces and not necessarily fully belonging in queer spaces or Asian spaces or femme spaces, female spaces. So I think it helps me approach my work with an eye toward belonging and making sure that everyone belongs and is included. And I also think that I recognize that there's a lot of people out there whose intersectionalities are much more impactful than mine, and I think it helps me to see that and to try to create space and understanding for how intersectionality impacts what people are bringing to the work and the spaces. So yeah, I think that's how it kind of impacts me.
I love that. I love the overarching concept of belonging, because that's, is it on? As I was saying, the whole concept of belonging, we as trans people, we are constantly on this journey of feeling like, do we belong? Is this the right space for me in place? So I like that, and yeah, do we ever belong, right? Mattie, how about you?
I think that when I think about intersectionality, I think one of the things that has really helped me in terms of my own identities, not only as, I'm a former sex worker, I am someone who is formerly homeless, someone who is homeless with a child, I am a parent, I am the child of immigrants, and my dad came here at 18, dirt poor, working as, a car wash attendant, right? And I think that that's something that, one, has helped me just conceptualize my own experience, right? And in terms of my African culture, my Liberian culture, my Creole culture, something that's helped me conceptualize my own transness and be okay with that. Because I think that one of the things that folks often, that I hear often is like, oh, like people act like transness just existed like within the last 10 years. And just having a deeper understanding of my culture and that, transness has always been very deeply spiritual and deeply ingrained in my own culture as a rebel person, as a Liberian person, as an African. And so too has it been deeply ingrained in a lot of BIPOC cultures, right? And that's something that we've kind of gotten away from, due to white supremacy, due to systemic oppression. And I think that when I think about intersectionality in terms of the patients that I serve, it's helped me be deeply sensitive to not only the experiences of my patients, but the ways in which their experiences, not only in whatever cultures or countries they may be from, but within the context of being in America and enduring white supremacy, how they may be coming into that space and how to meet their needs, especially in terms of the different healthcare disparities that might be present due to those experiences. I think specifically with Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network, in terms of the experiences of being a trans woman, right, and existing in a culture that is deeply trans misogynist and deeply ingrained in trans misogynoir. I feel like having that intersectional lens and having the people that we serve inform the work that we do is also one of the ways that I acknowledge the intersectionality of all of our experiences.
That's very beautiful that you mentioned the aspect of spirituality, because I also as well resonate with that, and I do connect with that as well. And on the concept of intersectionality, we most often believe that intersectionality is a descriptive word, right? It's just used to describe an amalgamation of identities. But something about it that I think is very special is that intersectionality and also the trans experience is in a way a lens. It is a practice. And that is a daily thing. And this is where you bring in the whole spiritual aspect. And I'm not just, transness is not just an identity, as I mentioned, but rather a way of interpreting the world and going through your daily life of trying to discern what has been imposed on us and what we have been made to believe as to be reality in a way of life, in a way that we should be living, which I think is very structural, and it does a disservice to us and us being trans and having to transcend. So very beautifully put, Mattie. That was awesome. Nico, how does your intersectionality inform your work?
Yeah, I think for me, intersectionality means a number of things, both personally, but also with engaging in justice work. But for me, I think with intersectionality, I always think about both my marginalizations, but also my privileges that I have. And thinking about, yes, for me, I came out at, I was 13 years old, I'm Indigenous, I'm Latinx, I was houseless, engaging in great economies, though my proximity to whiteness is significant. I'm white passing, I'm Latinx and Indigenous. That is something that is, the privileges are deeply rooted in white supremacy. You can't, yes, I'm marginalized, and I also have privileges that I need to acknowledge and also work to understand how that impacts my social location in the world. Also, as a trans person, I'm trans, but I'm transmasculine. And for my entire life, coming out of 1997 through now, I've been in trans communities, predominantly raised by Black trans femmes and Latinx trans femmes, and my positionality, my privilege is something that I've noticed through my entire life as a trans person. Yes, I experience significant, and have experienced significant discrimination, horrendous things I've experienced in my life, but people in my community, beloved people in my community, have also experienced things that I don't experience. So, that's something that I think that trans communities really need to understand. Our own privilege, especially trans masculine people, trans men like myself, really need to understand where our positionality is and when to shut up and get out of the way. And then also, for me, as someone who's an attorney now, I was privileged enough to get a AIDS scholarship to go to law school for free, but now I'm a lawyer. So I used to be an activist, an organizer, and I still am an activist and organizer, but that change, that plucking me away from who I am as my roots, being raised by, for, and in communities that I identify in. Now, the way white supremacy works is that it plucked out. Now I'm a lawyer. And I have a lot of power, a lot of privilege. And so just thinking about how, just because I can do something as a lawyer, should I? And can I do the kind of work that I want to do and we're doing in a completely different way, right? And so I think about intersectionality all the time, how to deconstruct things, but also how to ensure that I don't perpetuate bullshit systems just because now I have power, right? So, anyway.
Nico, you're a lawyer.
That's what
Li,
they tell me.
you're also a lawyer. From what I hear, taking the bar and going to law school is no easy task. Especially here in the state of New York and California, which I hear are the hardest. But what I wanted to ask is, how were you able to express and relate to your identities in a field that was very rigid and that necessarily had no, historically, had no contributions of people like us? So how were you able to cope with that during your time in law school?
I'm just a punk. But no, I mean, I was a public defender for 4 years. I was in courtrooms every day. Again, I was extremely privileged, right? Like the discrimination shit that I experience in court is nothing compared to the folks that I'm working for, who are, so I do criminal law, and so you can imagine, if you can imagine, I don't know. But it's me being misgendered every day or being called Mr. Cantina instead of Quintana or like things like that. It's just like, yeah, the systems are fucking racist, transphobic, et cetera, but it's not, sorry I'm cursing, but it's nothing compared to what folks who aren't perceived to have privilege in that system experience. And so, being a lawyer, I mean, it's a really fucked up profession, and more people need to come in and be a punk and disrupt it. But it's horrendous. It's horrendous. I'm like 5 feet. I can't reach the friggin' papers. Everyone is like 6'2". I'm like, I feel like these lawyers are like, they're white men that are 6'2". They have a 6'2" club, and then like they put their papers up there. They all talk a certain way. They buy suits in the same places. And I walk out and anyway, it's a horrendous field, and I do think that more trans folks, especially BIPOC trans folks, need to be judges and leaders, etc. But it's such a messed up system that I just wish we can do something completely else. Let's all be abolitionists. We all should be, by the way. We all should be abolitionists. And if you don't know what that is, you should read and also, anyway.
Or you can
deal with
come find us
yourselves.
after and
But yeah, I don't be lawyers.
Lee, what do you have to say?
I think I'm a little more optimistic than Nico.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm also not speaking for my org right now, just so you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think everything Nico said is right. And like, the law is also like a huge tool of oppression, and particularly against LGBTQ communities that we'll talk about a little bit later. And so having, people from our community in there working to fight the law is also critically important, while acknowledging that it's deeply flawed and problematic. So, to your question about law school, and being a lawyer, it's really easy to lose yourself, I think. They have a very kind of strict understanding.
Fields in industry that we haven't had access to before. For example, law, politics, the medical field, and I think it's always, I think it's also quite an internal experience to be in such fields and have that realization of, oh, I look around and there aren't people like me. When I'm seeking a mentor, there isn't anyone that can relate to me. And I think that is also very important to acknowledge that once we have firsts in many of these fields, how do we make sure that there are others to follow, right? How do we make sure that there's a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, And I think it's very important to process the harsh and rough experiences that come with being the first in certain industries and fields. But with firsts, I think that on the flip side, and also on something much more optimistic, that I love to hear about is definitely the aspect of trans parenthood, which is not something that we have known before. It's not something that we have really discussed much. And I think that articulating what it's like to be trans, but also a parent, is something that needs to be articulated more. So Mattie, I just wanted to ask how you were able to also come to terms with your trans identity, but also being a parent, and how you were able to bridge both of those journeys into providing love for your child.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think that one, being pregnant was very hard for me. I think two, the baby after the pregnancy was very hard for me. Not my kid in and of themselves, but I think just I have never thought of myself or thought that I would have wanted to have a child. I think that at the time that I made the decision to be like, okay, like I could do this. Like this is something I could do, right? I was still also figuring out who I was, right? I was also trying to sort through, wade through my own identity, and I think that made it really difficult, at that point. And there were a lot of things that I experienced as a result of the shit show that is trying to conceptualize or find the language to describe or name your feelings or your experience or who you are. Because at the time that I made the choice to be a parent, I didn't necessarily know what trans was, right? Or like I knew that transness existed, but didn't know that it existed outside of a binary sphere. Really, that part of my pregnancy is really what kind of plunged me into the darkness and kind of out on the other side. And that's really when I started going deeper and talking to more of my family, who a lot of which still lives in Liberia, and diving deeper into not just who I was as a person, but culturally, who am I, right? Culturally, what does transness mean for for my ancestors or the people that I come from? And I really deeply believe that transness in a lot of ways saved my life. Finding spirituality and finding history and finding cultural significance of transness within my own culture helped me be so much more proud of who I am. And it made me so much more of an advocate and so much more firmly rooted in knowing, right, that the existence of trans people is not by coincidence, right? It's by divine design, right? And you know, it's really why I do the work that I do. And you know, again, when I say transness saved my life, I mean that in the most significant of ways, right? Finding that, you know, folks within my culture, you know, exalted transness as divine. You know, that lots of cultures in Africa are deeply non-binary and deeply gender fluid. It really, honestly, it changed my life. It you know, gave me a reason for an explanation for what I was going through in terms of the darkness that I felt before all of those discoveries, and truly, you know, I think in terms of parenting, it gave me the space to give my child the space and the expansiveness to explore who they are. And I don't think that without the experience of having them and the experience of pregnancy and the experience of figuring out how deeply ingrained in my own culture and history that transness was, I don't think that had I, by you know accident or whatever, fallen into pregnancy, I don't think that I would have been able to give my child that same expansiveness, or even myself. So,
that is absolutely beautiful, very, very beautiful. And just by show of hands, how many people in this room are parents? Okay. And you know, something that I think is very important for me, and that's also something that you all might resonate with as well, is that you know, something about sharing our trans experiences is that we also need to acknowledge that we are much more similar than we are different, right? Because everywhere around us, everywhere that we look to, what the you know, what the media is telling us is that we are different, and that because we are different, we can never get along, or we will never be able to coexist in peace and with love. And acknowledging the similarities of parenthood, whether cis or whether trans, is something that truly needs to be acknowledged, because that is also something that binds people, that makes people the same, and that makes people say, geez, we have the same experience. We both share a very similar type of love towards someone, right? And the reason why I also touch on children is because a huge aspect of contention at the moment is trans youth, right? And this is something that Nico and Li can speak on, being attorneys in their legal work currently with what's happening. Li, I know that you mentioned to me before the panel that you were just in Arkansas, and we also touched on Tennessee and what is just coming out of the state of Tennessee. So something that I wanted to talk about into the segue to the next question is, over the next year and over the next 2 years, you know, 2023 and 2024, what policies do you think need to be focused on to help improve the well-being and the safety of our community, and how can our advocacy work support that? So Li, how is it that we can show up and improve the safety for our community?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think for the next couple of years, we're going to be playing defense. You know, Washington is unique in that we can actually pass affirmative legislation and policy, like Mattie mentioned. but that is not the case in most of the country. And I think we saw it was almost 240 anti-LGBTQ bills in state houses across the country this year. We're expecting more next year. They've already started filing them. And so we are playing defense on these bills because they're passing laws that deny gender-affirming medical care for youth and also try to make it really difficult to get as adults. And so, for me, I think that's the number one priority, is getting people access to healthcare, keeping them healthy, keeping them safe, keeping them alive. And so, the trial in Arkansas was the first trial in the country on an outright ban. And we're seeing different iterations of this, right? So Arkansas banned all gender-affirming medical care for youth. So that includes puberty blockers, that includes hormones, that includes surgery. And mind you, you can do these things if you're a cis kid that wants to affirm your gender identity. So if you start puberty early, you can take puberty blockers. If you've got low testosterone and you're a cis boy, we'll give you testosterone. If you're a cis girl who wants breast augmentation, you can have that. But if you're a trans girl, you can't. And so these bills are about controlling bodies, they're about enforcing gender norms, and they're about erasing and silencing LGBTQ and particularly trans folks. So we saw that in Arkansas. Alabama made it a crime. It's a felony, punishable up to 10 years in prison. Idaho had a bill where it would have been punishable up to life in prison. Texas is identifying this medical care as child abuse. So people are now afraid that their kids will be taken away. And so, for me, again, that's the priority, is keeping families intact, keeping people safe, keeping them alive, and not letting them be erased, right? Because that's what they're trying to do. And so we need to speak up and be vocal and be loud about this and make sure that they don't succeed on this erasure. And, we talked about intersectionality earlier of identities, but there's also intersectionality of these issues and these themes, right? The controlling of trans bodies is directly related to the controlling of bodies of people who can be pregnant, right? The overturning of Roe v. Wade and that control of bodies is directly connected to this control of trans bodies. And so this fight, it's not just about trans folks, it's about all of us. And so that's the priority.
Nico, and how does your experience with your legal work also give you knowledge on that question?
Yeah, I think my legal work, but also I used to do organizing work in DC and other places. I think what's really important to think about, everything that both Li and Mattie mentioned before, about everything that everyone has said is important to think about. But what I tend to think about in my work as a lawyer is, yes, everything is urgent. Yes, this is awful, and how we respond matters, and who does defense matters. And so it's really amazing that Li is an attorney doing the work in Arkansas, right? And we really need to think about who's making the decisions when it comes to defense. Who are the folks who are getting the money to be to put it through the campaigns, to fight back at the legislature, being the ones who are doing the lobbying, being the ones who are the lawyers. I bring this up because time and time again that I've seen over the past 2 decades with trans justice work. First, back in the 90s, there was a wave of anti-LGBT bills, right? Anti-gay and lesbian bills that were not the same but similar. But this is not new, right? This happens over and over again. But what we can do differently this time is we can actually hire trans, Black and Latinx and Indigenous trans folks to be leading the efforts with defense, to be leading and being paid to run community-based organizing efforts in these states by and for the communities that are most impacted. And that's not happening right now, for as far as I can see. Not a disservice to ACLU or other groups, but in our urgency, and lawyers, are really folks that are to blame for a lot of this. Is yes, is urgent, but how we respond to urgency matters. And you're going to perpetuate white supremacy and anti-Black racism and transphobia if you don't pause and see how you're perpetuating things that have been done before. Like solutions to issues are only good if it actually comes from communities that are most impacted, who actually know what will be most helpful. And people can disagree with me, but yeah, so that's my thought on that. And also as a criminal defense attorney, folks have been criminalizing people, Black and brown communities in the U.S. forever, and these kinds of things are going to continue to criminalize, particularly Black trans folks and Latinx trans folks when you think about the bills in Alabama and other places. And so it's even more important when you think about that criminalization that we center folks most impacted in who's going to be paid and organizing and doing the defense. Sorry, I went off.
Real quick, just to add to that, sorry, Mattie. I just want to add to what I said. Justice is not going to be found in the courthouses, right? That's not where the solution lies, and that work is important. But that's not where real change is going to happen. It's going to happen, on the ground in the communities and with the organizing and with educating people and building power that way. So I didn't want to suggest, just want to clarify that the courts are not going to save us. Just that's important to keep in mind.
Nico, you mentioned the most impacted communities, and that being queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And something that I just wanted to ask is, why are folks that are queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, folks of color, why are we the most at harm by our government? Why is that we have become targeted in this way? And Mattie, I know that earlier in the conversation you brought up nuanced aspects of white supremacy and trans misogyny and sexism. Why would you say that is why we are being targeted by our government?
You asking me or asking you?
Mattie, yes, you.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
Yeah, sorry, no worries. I was just asking why queer and trans, Black and Indigenous people of color, why we are at risk, and why we are the most impacted by government policies at the moment.
I think that because our country was founded in the policing of Black and brown bodies, and at the end of the day, when Black and brown people and their bodies and their autonomy and their personhood and their existences are challenged in any way, we are going to be the ones to feel it the most, right? Because our system is working exactly how it was intended to work. I think that, it is, of course, apparent that, Black and brown, trans and queer folks are not the only folks involved in this conversation, but they are the most marginalized within the context of the conversation, right? When you, are thinking about, for example, Texas, which is also where I was born. Who's gonna feel the criminalization of trans youth the most? Black and brown families who don't have the money to move to Washington State, right? At Swedish, we had an influx of people specifically from Texas want to move to our state, right? I've not seen any Black or brown families, calling us up and wanting to make appointments or wanting support navigating the medical system here. And we see that because, one, Texas is trash, and two, just the amount of poverty that exists amongst the Black and brown community in a lot of the states that have the most active anti-trans legislation and policies, and also anti-abortion policies and legislation. It's just something that is going to happen as a function of the system that we live in.
You see, this is where intersectionality can also be a double-edged sword, right? In which a lot of the anti-trans policies trickle down and come to impact mostly Black and brown families and Black and brown individuals, which I think really reveals the racist nature of our country. And that's also something worth acknowledging and also addressing. And as we move forward, this is also how we can use the optimistic side of intersectionality to address that. Li, you mentioned something earlier when you were discussing Arkansas and Tennessee, in which you mentioned that children who identify as being cisgender, they are able to receive gender-affirming care. But if you identify as transgender, you are vilified and criminalized. How does that also tie in to this culture of heteronormativity that is just so ingrained in our culture, and why is it that children are being subjected to that?
Yeah, I mean, it is so steeped in that. And one thing I want to add to that is these laws are also carving out exceptions for intersex children. So surgeries can be performed on intersex infants, right? People who can't participate in this process at all, who cannot give assent, let alone consent. And so, and again, that goes back to this heteronormativity and this gender binary, these gender norms, right? That if you are ambiguous, it's okay to perform surgery on you to make you fit into one of these boxes that we're comfortable with. I think a bill that just was introduced in Tennessee really brought this to mind, really highlighted it in that it requires state employees to, which I think would include school systems, to inform parents if they notice that a child is not only potentially transgender, so that their gender identity is inconsistent with their sex assigned at birth, but even if that child is gender non-conforming, they would still need to write a letter to those parents, right? And so that's not an accusation that the child is trans, but that they don't fit into this binary that we're imposing on people. And I think it's just your ass is showing, that's so clear of what you're trying to do here. And I think they're targeting kids because they can. Just children have fewer legal rights. The parents have a lot more control over it. And, I think they would know that an outright ban on this care for adults would likely be unconstitutional. But in this country, if you say we're doing it to protect the children, you get a lot more deference. And so it's all under the guise of protecting children. Even though, at this trial in Arkansas, we had families testifying, and it's, parents and the kids and the doctors who have all made this decision together. And it's actually beautiful to watch this testimony, right, of these parents talking about their child being so withdrawn and in so much pain, and they didn't know what to do. And then their kid realizes that they're trans. And these are kids that are so lucky to have supportive and affirming families. There's so many kids out there that don't have that. But once they get that care, they come alive, they blossom. One parent was talking about they didn't have any pictures of their child smiling for the years leading up to that. And then afterward, they have all of these pictures, right? They're putting it and cloaking it in the language of protecting children, but when you actually listen to the children and to the families and the doctors, it's the exact opposite.
This reminds me of this really great book that I'm currently reading at the moment. the title of it is called The Myth of the Wrong Body. I don't know if some of you have read that, but I'm currently in this chapter that talks about when trans children have the realization that they are trans, and how limiting and hindering their expression then leads to a lot of repression and suppression within this child that really hinders their creativity, their sense of freedom, their sense of liberation, which can then manifest in ways that can be detrimental and negative for that child. So it's great that you bring that up, that it's that the current narrative that is being portrayed revolving around trans children is for their own protection, but in reality, it's very harmful and it's very negative to not allow a child to freely express themselves for their own fruitful and prosperous development, right?
Is it alright if I say one more thing?
Yes, of course, go ahead.
I think too, another function of it is to scare other children into conformity as well. Because one of the things that we know, I know earlier you asked other folks who has children, right? So this is something that doesn't just impact trans children, it also impacts cis children as well. There was a recent case where there was like a girls' track team. And one of the girls was faster than this girl over here. And because of, the rules that they had regarding, trans women or trans girls being on the track team, another parent and, this track runner who lost to this other girl was like, well, she's trans. And so they had to, go into her school records to make sure that when, she started school, I think it was like in kindergarten, that she was actually the same gender from then to now, right? And this is something that, not only impedes and scares trans children into, potentially not being their authentic selves, but reinforcing for cis children that like, I cannot, I have to be this particular way, right? And I think that like gender exploration is normal for children, right? Like that's a normal part of development. And I think that all children, whether they're cis or trans, are deeply impacted by not being able to have that gender exploration that gets them to whoever their authentic self is.
Side note, before I move on to the final question and we moved on to the Q&A portion of our program, I just wanted to say that one of the main takeaways of this conversation is that as we develop strategies of advocacy and how we're moving on in politics, one of the things that I hope you all realize is that we really need to do introspective work. One of the ways that we figure out how to proceed is we look within and we ask ourselves, what is the good thing to do here, right? What is right, what is wrong, what is harmful, what isn't? And much of what is happening right now with the extremist rhetoric that we're seeing being used by the far right is that they are portraying transness as being inherently wrong and unnatural, which I think is, I think that that's a precursor to violence, and it's important to address that and to nip that in the bud, because if we do not, that violence and that hateful rhetoric is going to translate into other aspects of our lives and our society, and that is something that should be a huge tenet of our advocacy and our political strategy moving forward. So for the final question is that for those in the LGBTQ plus community who feel disheartened by voting, what are some of the steps that we could take to advance our rights? Nico, we can begin with you.
Hello. Okay, great. I can use the microphone. All right. I think voting. Yeah, I think voting is very important. Is in the sense of if that's all you have, that voting cycle that you can do. That's one way. But I do think that there's so many different ways to make change in a very tangible, authentic way that works for you and your community, depending on your own social location and privilege. I go back to a little bit what I talked, and actually what folks are doing or what they decide to do, it doesn't actually help. And so I think it's really important that in this time when it's a really horrendous time. It's really scary, and it's also important not to lose our hats and to remember that there are people who've been doing this work for a very long time, like a lot of folks here, and folks here should be paid and lifted up and come to, not just us, but other folks who are similar when it comes to making decisions, and not just random folks who are in the right place in the right time. It's convenient to be making decisions about what to do in Arkansas or what to do in other places. So I'm concerned about that as we move forward in the next several years, just making sure that decisions aren't made for our communities. Because how we do the work matters in building the next generation of leaders and the current generation of leaders. And it shouldn't be cis people making decisions for our communities.
Mattie?
I wrote down my answer to this because I don't want to forget. Let me scroll. Sorry about that.
And in the meantime, I hope everybody else is formulating your questions.
So, sorry about that. I think, I want to echo everything that Nico said. I think that oftentimes what happens in situations like these is like policies and like legislation gets made around our community, and then someone goes, well, what about black and brown people? And then we get like brought in at the last second when everything is already said and done. There's no further input that we're able to give, and or if we do give input, everyone's like, well, we already kind of went through the process, so there's really nothing more to do. We just need like a black or brown person in the room so that people on the outside don't say, oh, well, like you didn't have, the leadership, or there were no black or brown people a part of XYZ policy or legislation. And I think that it's really important, again, in the vein of what Nico said, to have black and brown folks, the most marginalized folks, and it's not just black and brown folks, right? It's undocumented folks, it's immigrants, it's migrants, it's disabled folks, it's youth, right? Those folks in the room from the start, and leading the process, and being given mentorship by folks with privilege, right? How do our youth know what steps to take without folks in the room saying, hey, like, let me mentor you, let me prepare you for the path that you're going to take, and then take the path and lead the way for everyone else. I think that that's really important. I think another thing that folks can do is volunteer with grassroots LGBTQIA plus organizations or under-resourced community collectives. I think that, again, oftentimes it's these folks who are left out of larger efforts due to marginalized status, lack of capacity, underfunding. I think that it's really important to understand that the solutions to a lot of these problems lie within our communities. And the only reasons why these solutions aren't carried out on a larger scale is lack of capacity, is lack of funding, is lack of people with privilege, using that privilege to pave a path into these rooms, into these boardrooms. And so I think now more than ever, it's especially important for those in the community with more privilege to engage in the work of following the lead of the most impacted in our communities. And again, as we've said, often these folks are the most impacted by these anti-LGBTQIA plus policies.
Li?
Yeah, so I'd echo everything Nico and Mattie said. I would say still vote. And what I would add is to educate yourself and to help educate others. So, some research on this shows that a lot of the country now knows about like LGBT issues. They don't know about trans issues, right? There's a huge lack of understanding. And so that's part of how these bills, these bad laws are gaining traction. People don't understand it and they're scared. And so we need you to educate yourself, so thank you for being here tonight, and then speak up about what you've learned and help educate others. We need to have more understanding on this. The holidays are coming up. It's a great opportunity to talk about it with your family, terrible as that might be.
Hey, Grandma Matt.
But that's just, there's just a huge ignorance that's still in this country on these issues. So on top of everything, look up what abolition means. Look up, what gender affirming healthcare means. Look into who are the organizations on the ground doing this work, and put your resources there if you can. And what your resources could be money, it could be your time, it could be just retweeting them. Maybe Twitter's uploading, reposting them on Instagram. And then lifting up the people doing that work in various ways. So follow them on Instagram, read the books, do all of that stuff, and just make yourself a well-informed citizen on these issues.
Before moving on to audience questions, I will also say two things that I also recommend is obviously voting and everything that you all said, but also have you all taken the trans survey? I just took the trans survey. Have you taken it? Mattie, I know you took it. Okay, awesome. It took me quite some time. It was an hour long, but I think that the 2022 trans survey is very important. It's a follow-up from the 2015 trans survey, and it's also a great way to develop comprehensive legal strategies and policies revolving around the trans community, which I think is very important. And the second one is I am a huge fan of the Victory Institute based in Washington, D.C., who has helped elect a handful of LGBT candidates. Just this year alone, I believe that they helped elect 340-something individuals, part of the LGBT community, to elected office, breaking the record previously held in 2020 of 330 individuals. So I highly recommend that you check them out and that you also donate some resources to them. But yes, Nick is going to come around with the microphone and anybody with questions?
Perfect. Yeah.
See, two
I'm
hands.
going to start here and then make my way across the room, and then if we have more, we'll move back.
And please say your names and your pronouns in the question.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I use she, they pronouns. I have just completed the campaign to elect Mary Fossey, the state representatives, House of State Representatives. So we have avoided representation that wants to take away mastectomies from insurance coverage. Thank you, the 38th Legislative District. My question to you is, I'm part of Gen Z, and we have gained a lot more experience, it seems, than other generations in organizing and mobilizing. We have a lot of energy and really want to join the workforce and be able to pursue the issues that we want. However, with people that have lived experience of being non-binary, being queer, being from kind of a blue-collar or poverty, just float above life experience, there are a lot of us that are going into policy work, going into legal work, and don't always know that it sucks. Don't always know that we have to be punks in the work and that we have to put ourselves on the line. That, it's important to have employee resource groups, but we are going to be the only ones in the room sometimes that are the only abolitionists, that are the only queer person, that are the only person that's saying, hey, can you shut the fuck up? Their pronouns are they, them. pardon my language. What is your advice to people that are getting into this work in order to be the best accomplices we can, as well as to sustain ourselves so that we can actually become you guys in a few years, so that we can come to our communities and be experts in our communities?
Thank you, Lauren. That was a great question. Anybody want to take that up?
Yeah, I would say this is a really good question. I think that it's important, especially in Washington State. I think that I think that the culture here is very passive. I think that it boils down to stop trying to be liked by everyone. I think it also boils down to, there's this saying that I always hear in Washington about, what is it? About conflict, right? Like everyone has their own perspective, we can all get along. Like, if your perspective is rooted in the oppression or subjugation or dehumanization of somebody else, we can't agree to disagree. And I think that that's something that's really important. It's also something that's super important in the work that I do in healthcare. I think that it boils down to knowing how to engage in conflict, in generative conflict, and know that you're not always going to be liked, and that has to be okay. It has to.
Yeah, I can offer a little bit of thoughts on that too. I think one advice that I always say when folks are like, what do I do to take care of myself and others? Be a donkey. Donkeys are really smart because not the Democratic Party donkey, but like donkeys, when they're tired, they sit down, right? They stop working. It's not that they're stubborn, they're smart. And so I think what's important is that you really need to sit when you're tired. You need to take care of yourself. And then the other thing is you need to build relationships. And when I've been doing organizing, I don't ever view myself as an expert. One, I've been doing organizing since I was 13 years old, out of necessity, not out of want. Before the internet. And so I agree, conflict's gonna happen. I've organized across the US in 13 different cities. And the thing that is consistent when it comes to making change and building and doing wherever you want to do, wherever you need to do it, is building authentic connections, finding common ground, and getting out of the way when you are not the right person to be in the room. And I think all of that combined is really important. But again, you can't do any of that if you don't take care of yourself. And be a burro. You gotta sit down. You gotta sit down, take care of yourself, take a nap. And then also educate yourself on how to build those authentic relationships across difference, across positionality. Yeah.
It's going to be less eloquent than just saying find the other punks. Both parts of your question, right? Like how to get things done, but also the self-care piece of it. Find your community, right? Like if you end up going to law school, like it'll be clear who they are within the first week. You're like, oh, okay, like there's 4 of you, you're my people. And then, and I think just that kind of add to what Nico said, like not only getting out of the way if you're not the right person in the room, but invite the right person into that space. If you see that the right person isn't there, do something about it.
I will say, as trans people, it's in our nature to be disruptive. Nowadays, if we play to the respectability politics, we are not going to get anywhere, right? For me in San Francisco, much of the work that I've done, I have sometimes had to fight to be let into the room or to be able to speak. And there were times in which I didn't take those chances of speaking. And I told myself, if I don't go for it, if I don't stand up for myself, nobody's gonna give me the floor. So I'm gonna take it myself. So that's what I would say. But thank you for that great question. Any other questions? I saw a hand, yes.
they kind of had my question too, but I guess I'll just kind of shift on it. When asked to be on this panel, what was the deciding factor in you saying, yes, this is something I want to speak on?
I think one, I like Crystal. And then two, I think, for myself, any opportunity that I have to share just one sliver of the trans experience amongst a sea of various unique experiences is one that I want to take. I think also, I think that's it.
You told me Mattie and Nico were going to be on the panel, and I was like, that sounds cool. But kind of same, like any opportunity to kind of talk to people about these issues, right? Like I was talking about the importance of education and the lack of understanding in our country on these issues, and so I thought that this could be helpful.
Yeah, looking amazing panelists, but also as a trans grandpa, I get really bitter, and one way to not be bitter is really to meet more people, remember that we're a community, and also, just realize how far we have come, right? Like, I don't mean to talk, this might be a little bit triggering, but like, we've come a long way. Like, there's been a shit ton further to go, but like, I literally was going to a vigil every 2 months, 2 to 3 months for the majority of the 2000s in my communities. And now, yes, there's a ton of stuff still happening, and I still go to vigils, and I still go to funerals, and we also have access to healthcare. I had to pay out of pocket for my chest surgery, 15 years ago. Lost a lot of friends due to healthcare complications back in the day. We have made some strides, and we have to fight to keep those. And that's why I like coming to things like this, because I have a lot of pain. There's been a lot of pain, and being a community helps with that, and helping new activists, new organizers to learn together, grow.
For me, I will say that most often the work that we do is very reactionary, and what I mean by that is that we sometimes do our work based on what is in front of us, right? Most often as trans people, we do not have the privilege to engage in strategy for the future. And I think that is something that really needs to change and allow ourselves to say, in the next 2 to 3 years, this is what we need to do. This is how we need to organize, because forethought always wins, right? And this is how we truly capture a prosperous future, if we allow ourselves the opportunity to envision a future in which this is where we need to be at this time. Because the average lifespan of a trans person, especially of a trans woman of color, it's mid-30s, 36. And I think that it's time that we begin to we begin to work towards ensuring that trans people have a really long lifetime. And that is also something that drew me to this conversation of, this is how we can use political strategy to make sure that we get there. Another question?
Good evening, I'm Brandy. My pronouns are she and her. And one of the things that I think are really important to address is talking about what we can do as allies. So I know that many marginalized communities face this challenge of activism fatigue. And so what are some best practices that you can give to us allies that are here in the room to help support some of the initiatives you're trying to drive, and what's our call to action?
Great question. Yes. Ali, I know that you mentioned something earlier today about devoting time to self-care. So what do you do for self-care when you're at the courtroom all day and you need time to unwind and to take care of yourself?
Yeah, sometimes I stay off the news, like that's a big one. Once I kind of started doing this work as my job, I was like, I can't handle that, like that's, not the, and so that's part of it. I think understanding that like I have my role to play and I can't do it all. So right, like this is how I'm contributing and other people are contributing in other ways and that's okay, I can't do it all. And then as far as allies and how you can show up, it's a good question. I mean, I am not an organizer and so I come at this from kind of like the much more of a lawyer hat. And so like for that, I mean, helping prevent these bad bills from getting passed would make my life a lot easier. So right, but you know, if you're not a lawyer, like I think resources is one. So like, but that's for me, and I'm not saying that like putting your resources towards litigation is the best use of your resources, but so I might kind of defer to the people who are more in the actual organizing arena as to how allies can show up.
Popping in a lot, so would you like to?
Sure, give your money away to groups that, you know, have integrity and are doing the work. Not to say that, anyway, not to point fingers at certain groups, but like do a little bit of homework to see which groups are doing authentic, like good, trusted work in the community, and then fund their work. And also there could be coalitions. This doesn't have to be groups that are actually 501c3. That's like when I first started, I was with the DC Trans Coalition. We weren't a 501c3. We didn't have the funding. We were just a bunch of activists working together and we did a lot of work. But we were funded only through individuals getting us some money and it paid a lot of us our living expenses, right? So like thinking about like really creative ways to give to communities who are doing the work, maybe even folks who aren't seen. And then also, you know, like Lee said, I think having those conversations with your friends. Because as a trans person, I can't tell you, I get misgendered every single day. I'm sure most people do too, I don't know, but I literally get misgendered every single day. And then I get inappropriate questions every single day. And so in Seattle, from progressive, well-meaning, kind folks, and then folks also come up to me and just start talking to me about the news. They talk to me about their kid who's trans. They talk to me about whatever trans thing that has happened. And so I think folks mean well, right? But more education needs to happen from folks they trust of saying, hey, so next time you meet a trans person, and maybe you like don't just go to someone and say, hey, did you do this to a trans person recently? That may not be great, but just say, hey, have you thought about this? Why don't you talk to me about it? You know, why don't we talk about what's going on with your kid together? And then, I don't know. I just can't tell you how many times folks have just come up to me out of the blue. I'm like, hi, my name is Nico. They're, hi, my name is Sandy. Oh, nice to see you, coffee. Did you see that trans bill? I have a trans kid. Blah, blah, blah. Like, that's great, but maybe we just met each other, so.
Right.
Yeah, I think something super tangible. I'm assuming, does everyone in here work? So I think one of the most tangible and helpful things for at least in terms of my job that folks can do is find out whether transgender specific healthcare is covered under your company's insurance policy. I think that, and finding out what exactly is covered. If you have a self-funded plan, which essentially means your employer likely purchased an a la carte plan from outside of the state of Washington often. It's those types of plans that are allowed to kind of skirt under Washington state's laws regarding, access to gender-affirming care, specifically with insurance. So really talking to your HR department about why that is and why those things aren't covered, and enlist people, right? Enlist your coworkers to really lobby your HR department or benefits administrator as to why these things aren't covered and get them covered for the next year. You don't know how many folks that I support on a daily basis who, because they live in the state of Washington, assume that all of these things are covered, just to find out that they're not. There are ways that on my end that we can kind of get around those things, and Q-Law has actually been really great with giving me the legalese to kind of tell people to tell their HR departments and their benefits department to like scare them into covering these things. But really, what we need is for employees to be like, why isn't this covered? Like, I thought that this was our mission statement, right? And, you know, everywhere has a mission statement where they're like, we're into diversity and inclusion and blah, 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 blah. Well, this is the time where you can force your employer to put their money where their mouth is. If you are as inclusive as you say that you are, if you are as committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion as you say that you are, then we should have these things covered in our insurance plan. Plain and simple.
100%, and then also look for other ways that, like, how might your company be discriminating against trans folks, right? Like, are they required to put like their gender on documents? Like, is there more than one, like the 2 gender options? Like, if you have a uniform, is there a male uniform and a female uniform? Like, should it be non-binary? Who gets to wear it? Like, those kinds of things can also make a tangible difference. Healthcare's priority, but like, just be creative and kind of thoughtful about like, what are the ways that kind of my work and my everyday life might be creating space that's hostile to trans folks, to non-binary folks, to, you know, LGBTQ folks, but particularly trans folks.
All right, y'all. I wish that we had more time for more questions. Nonetheless, if you have a question that you would like to ask us, please do so offline. I'm sure that some of us will stick around, so feel free to do so then. Nonetheless, this has been a great discussion. Thank you to all the panelists for being so elaborate in their questions and for also bringing in your own personal experiences for this. And also thank you to the audience for listening and for being here and for also having wonderful, incredible questions. Thank you for that. Having an engaged audience is definitely something that really informs the conversations that we should all be having. So I really appreciate that. And nonetheless, I'll pass it over to Nick to close us for the evening.
All right, y'all. Big round of applause for our panel. Genuinely, I appreciate you being here. And thank you to Chateau Ste. Michelle for this beautiful venue. Keep an eye on our website, seattlepride.org. We'll have a whole new panel experience for 2023. We hope to see you at the next one. We'll be announcing those dates soon. Drive safe getting home, and we hope to see you all at the next one. Thanks so much.